Archdiocesan Pastoral Plan. What is it in a nutshell? By now, we've been hearing that term for maybe even a couple of years, with a fair amount of ambiguity about what it might literally mean in practice. Again, as Americans, we want to know what that looks like. We don't want to just know the theory. So I think in first place, it's about understanding the challenges and opportunities that current and future realities present to us, the local church, and to each of its members, parishes, and groupings. Okay? So understanding what the challenges and the opportunities are for us, not just as individual Christians, Catholics, or even individual groups like the St. Vincent de Paul Society or the Knights of Columbus or an individual parish, but what even the local church as a whole facing in terms of challenges and opportunities. And then it's planning, okay, both collective and proactive. Notice that it's not reactive or uncoordinated. So there's an observation on the part of the cardinal that it's not sufficient for us to deal with or to live our lives just sort of a reactive mode, but to be, or an individual mode, but to plan together, collective and proactive, okay? Which is a little bit of a change, I think. And we might individually or as departments sometimes do some proactive forward thinking and some coordinated activity, but he's asking the whole Archdiocese and all of its parts to work together in a collective way and in a proactive way to address the opportunities and the challenges that are before us. So that may not sound like a big deal, but it is kind of a new thing, and by that very nature, it's hard for us because it's not maybe part of our natural way of doing things or our customary way of doing things. Pastoral, okay, it's not primarily administrative, procedural, or structural, and it's not primarily any kind of new theory or new theology. You don't have to remember that, just to help clarify what this plan is in a nutshell. Here are some of my observations as I have struggled with many others in the process of trying to move from current reality to explore and discern to the pathways, objectives, and as you know, the whole unfolding. One is, it's fraught with difficulties because we're not used to thinking or operating in this kind of collective way on this level. To really expand the borders beyond just my parish. I talked to the pastors out there in my deanery, and for them to think in terms of collaboration with another parish or parishes, while it's not ununderstandable or unintelligent, it's not habitual either. So to think beyond just our normal collaborators or our own small group. Also, parishes, our parishioners, how well do we get them to go beyond self-interest? Okay, like in Charles Darwin, when we do the DSF push every year, right? How do we get people to think beyond just the parish? How's it going to help me? What problems will it resolve or ameliorate for me or my group? What's it going to ask of me? What's my return on investment, or for me or for my parish? Those are the kind of more typical ways we address things and want to know how it's going to benefit me. So to go against that with this Archdiocesan Pastoral Plan is a little bit of a new way of approaching things, a new way of doing things. A danger of a cultural bias, which I alluded to earlier in terms of our preference for pragmatism and problem solving, how to get things done. I've done this talk or something similar now a number of times, and when we open it up for discussion, we quickly move from the spiritual to the practical. It's just so instinctual to start trying to hammer out a new way of doing things, a new procedure, a new structure, a new process, instead of what we're being called to, which I'll talk about later, which is more of an inner conversion. So the first method of the plan is to grow in spiritual qualities that form us into a family or a community of disciples. That's probably not new, right? The idea of being formed into a family, because we use that language a lot. We're all one big family, right? Dysfunctional. I forget sometimes the adjective that describes it so well, a dysfunctional family. But the first method of this plan is that it be a spiritual formation of persons. Okay? A spiritual formation of persons. When we were going through the Explore and Discern committee meetings, I was seized with the impulse to say, we don't need to do anything beyond just the formation of people in this spirituality of communion. If we did nothing else for the next 3 years, then direct our energies towards forming ourselves and one another in a spirituality of communion, that would almost be already the answer to all the other problems. Because we would be, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, I don't need the suspense. But I really felt like that would be enough. Just the formation of us in the spirituality of communion. What is Novo Millennio Iniunte? Well, of course, it means at the beginning of the new millennium. And John Paul II had written this document at the conclusion of the Jubilee year, and he was addressing it to the pastors of the church, the bishops. And in that, he says a couple of important things, many important things. It's not, therefore, a matter of inventing a new program. The program already exists. It's the plan found in the gospel and in the living tradition. It is the same as ever. Ultimately, it has its center in Christ himself, who is to be known, loved, and imitated, so that in him we may live the life of the Trinity, and with him transform history until its fulfillment in the heavenly Jerusalem. Now, here's how I've unpacked that statement. You'll see there. It's personal, but it's also collective holiness. For the sake of mission. So we can put that in some of you catechists might like this, the idea of maybe even beyond catechists. But we're called, we're formed as we celebrate, and then we're sent. Right? It's that whole thing of like the Mass. We're called together, we are formed, and formed by what we celebrate, and then we're sent. And so he's saying that we're called to live this life of the Trinity, which I'll explain a little bit more in depth or get into, so that we can transform history. Notice that in the Gospels, that the disciples are first called to Jesus. So there is a personal call to Jesus. But almost simultaneously is this call to be in a community of disciples. And it's in that community of disciples with Jesus at the center that they are being formed in order to be sent. Okay? So the Holy Father is suggesting that for us too, we can't get the cart before the horse and go being sent without attention to the call to a relationship and an ever-growing relationship with Jesus himself. And with, in a real way, a community of disciples. Okay? That probably is a piece that I don't know that we have appreciated the real depth of yet. And I think I can say why that might be. So how about we read that on the last page that you have, it should be the Novo Millennium in paragraph 43. And since I'm familiar with it and I've got the camera staring at me, I'll read it on our behalf. To make the church the home and the school of communion. That is the great challenge facing us in the millennium, which is now beginning, if we wish to be faithful to God's plan and respond to the world's deepest yearnings. But what does this mean in practice? Here too, our thoughts could run immediately to the action to be undertaken. But that would not be the right impulse to follow. Before making practical plans, we need to promote a spirituality of communion, making it the guiding principle of education, wherever individuals and Christians are formed, wherever ministers of the altar, consecrated persons, and pastoral workers are trained, wherever families and communities are being built up. A spirituality of communion indicates above all the heart's contemplation of the mystery of the Trinity dwelling in us, and whose light we must also be able to see shining on the face of the brothers and sisters around us. A spirituality of communion also means an ability to think of our brothers and sisters in faith within the profound unity of the mystical body, and therefore as those who are part of me. This makes us able to share their joys and sufferings, to sense their desires and attend to their needs, to offer them deep and genuine friendship. A spirituality of communion implies also the ability to see what is positive in others, to welcome it and prize it as a gift from God. Not only as a gift for the brother or sister who has received it directly, but also as a gift for me. Spirituality of communion means, finally, to know how to make room for our brothers and sisters, bearing each other's burdens, and resisting the selfish temptations which constantly beset us and provoke competition, careerism, distrust, and jealousy. Let us have no illusions. Unless we follow this spiritual path, external structures of communion will serve very little purpose. They would become mechanisms without soul, masks of communion, rather than its means of expression and growth. So, as I said, the first part, which is divided into two, is about just understanding a problem, maybe identifying it even in your own personal experience. Where have you in your lived experience of family life, or in your professional ministry or work, have you experienced that sort of survival of the fittest mentality, where you have to kind of protect and defend, and maybe seek your own interests first? Where have you experienced that? Okay? And then secondly, God is ultimately a better way to do our ministry, but a better way to be church. Okay, a different way, a different set of priorities, from manipulating the structures and the methods and the processes to a collective spiritual journey over the next several years.